Side of the News, our weekly discussion of today's top stories from a religious, moral, and ethical point of view. I'm Shawn Kaelin with the WHAS Crusade for Children. And as always, I'm joined by a distinguished panel of religious leaders. Dr. Jamesetta Ferguson, St. Peter's United Church of Christ. Father Bill Hammer, St. Margaret Mary and St. William Catholic Churches. Rabbi Stan Miles, Louisville Melton School. And Dr. John Slider, retired pastor, Free Methodist Church. We begin this week with JCPS dealing with the possibility of losing federal funding. At question, their DPE program, Diversity, Equity, and Poverty, is that the same as DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, the program the Department of Education wants schools to end?
2 weeks ago, JCPS and public schools across the nation were given a notice about diversity, equity, and inclusion from the federal government.
I can't really tell you much about the letter other than our legal department is reviewing that.
Board member Linda Duncan, who represents parts of Central and South Louisville, says they're waiting on legal counsel to determine if their diversity, equity, and poverty division is being targeted. But at JCPS, it's been around 41 years before it became a political issue.
We can't really equate DEI with DEP, and I think there's an effort to try and do that, but I don't think it's the same thing. We don't have the policies that promote one group over another group.
A letter sent by the United States Department of Education says any institutions that receive federal funds must dismantle DEI programs. It says in part, quote, "The law is clear. Treating students differently on the basis of race to achieve nebulous goals such as diversity, racial balancing, social justice, or equity is illegal under controlling Supreme Court precedent." It goes on to say school districts have 14 days from that date to comply or face potential loss of federal funding. Duncan says their DEP division has existed since 1984 and was a product of when Louisville school districts merged.
The work that department does is really about removing barriers to achievement for our African American students and for other students too, Hispanic students or and any students, our special needs students. But it's about identifying barriers and removing the barriers.
The largest school district in Kentucky still determining if their DEP division is in jeopardy.
So, Moral Side panel, we bring it out to you. What moral, ethical considerations should guide the decision-making process here?
Wow.
Yes.
It's a complex question. They're kind of wiggling around the DEI versus DEP. The first two letters mean the same thing in both acronyms. As I prepared for this discussion, I was thinking back to the civil rights movement of the 1960s, and thinking how the emphasis there, the goal there, was to see racial differences as really immaterial for politics, social norms, cultural practices, and I felt that was a noble cause. And then we have flipped here, and I'm not necessarily saying that the JCPS, Jefferson County Public Schools, are practicing this, but it seems we're switching back to from e pluribus unum, out of many one, to dividing each other into racial groups for particular emphasis. I did spot check some of the schools and their DEP surveys that they're required to do, and the sense that I got, I could be misreading, but in my spot checking, they only survey, as they call it, students of color. So in order to determine if there's diversity and equity occurring in a school, and they try to get how they feel. And so the emphasis there right off the bat to me seems to be one of separation of racial considerations versus all students and moving all students together. I'm not as knowledgeable on the DEP program. I really can't directly criticize it negatively or positively.
Well, see, I did not do that level of research.
Well,
but
don't be too impressed.
But I do think it is appropriate, and we certainly, throughout all kinds of contexts, if you've come across a situation where in a group of people, you have some who have need requirements that are different than others, you try to respond to those particular needs. Learning differences. You know, I think that's an example, and particularly we work on that. And sometimes you do have situations where people may be having issues that related to the fact that they don't have access to food regularly, or you know, things that instability in the homes, and we should target those areas. And oftentimes that's related to poverty.
Yeah.
And so I do think it's really critical, and that we do find ways to assist our students who are struggling. And that does sometimes mean that they are going to receive additional opportunity to learn, to grow, to accelerate, that it's not just across the board. That seems to be like anything else. That's what I think WHA's Crusade for Children does.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
It's what it does. It targets certain special needs. You know, the fact that the fact that my nieces and nephews are healthy doesn't mean that they're being discriminated because they don't benefit from Crusade for Children. So,
I had to pull myself out of the rafters with some of these cuts, because, you know, what happens to our call as people to help those who are the least of these.
Yes.
And for Jefferson County Public Schools, this is a program that has been in existence for over 40 years. Even before there was DEI, this program existed. And so for it to be targeted now, I have issue with that. But the other part of this is Jefferson County Public Schools is at least 80% people of color, children of color. And so...
I disagree with that number. I don't think that's correct at all.
Oh, I believe it is.
80%.
80%.
That means 20% are white, to use it. I disagree with that number.
Well, check.
I will, and I'll post it on the YouTube
Okay.
Posting.
But irregardless, these are children, and the support that they are getting from these programs, whether you're white or black or brown, is support that these children need. And the thought of reducing federal funds just as a blanket reduction, I have a problem with that, and I think it's the most vulnerable that are going to suffer because of that.
I agree with you, Jamesetta. I just, with all these massive cuts in every direction, I don't understand them. I don't know what they're accomplishing. It seems like in the last month, every time we either open a newspaper or turn on a news telecast, there's something else that is just being mandated or changed or eliminated. And I don't understand that as political conservatism. To me, when we're talking about classic political conservatism, we're talking about getting the government out of people's lives. And there are so many things that have happened over the last month that it seems like the government is in our lives now more than I've ever experienced it. I was thinking about back 70 years ago when I was in elementary school on the playground and it's recess, and something happens and one kid would taunt another, well, it's a free country. I'm not sure over the last month that our level of I can't really taunt anyone with it's a free country anymore, because I'm not sure how free it is.
Stan, I think your reaction for just a month is a little a lot over the edge. I think we need to differentiate between the actions toward persons who are in poverty. And I certainly would agree that we need to address those needs. I will, as a caveat, say that in our deliberations with the Crusade for Children, we are not allowed, I guess, it's not part of our mission to see poverty as a special need for a child. And we wrestle with that back and forth. What I object to, and what I see the reaction by this new administration to DEI funding is funding any program that differentiates between the races within Jefferson County Public Schools. How much is the DEP program actually saying, well, we value these students over these students, or the opinions? I looked at the survey and tried to discern in a very brief time, Bill. It wasn't, I'm retired, but not that retired. To see, and there was a stress on receiving input from persons of color, students of color, which I presume excludes persons not of color, which would be white in that case, or European Americans, as I prefer to say. So I think we need to differentiate, my point, and I ramble, between the issues of poverty, which I do think we need to address, and that type of funding is appropriate, and issues that discriminate between the races.
Well, but I think we define DEI as just division in the races, but DEI covers so much more.
It certainly does.
Because we're not talking about women, we're not talking about LGBTQ, we're not talking about all of these other demographics that are included in DEI, and we have a tendency to try to narrow it down to just race.
Sure.
And so that by itself causes more division than it should, because it embraces so many other areas that never get talked about.
I was just reacting, though, to the JCPS surveys and the reporting that's done school by school. It focuses primarily on racial well, not primarily, only on racial considerations. As I read it, I'll be happy to stand corrected, though.
Well, I do think that, going back to the thing, that I think there are certain areas of our community where you're more likely to have, say, something as simply as parental involvement, encouragement going on. I know that I was blessed growing up that I had books and things like that to practice reading before I ever entered school. My parents would work with it. I can remember watching them work with my younger siblings. Things like that, that a lot of times that's that fundamental building blocks to succeed in life, but particularly to learn and be ready for school. And that's not available to all children heading in.
Mm-hmm.
And so to find ways that can be recognized from the very beginning, early on, and or if it takes a year or two in the school to learn that this child is falling farther and farther and farther behind, we need to find a way to help that child succeed. And that does mean targeting sometimes certain areas or certain students that are not necessarily being targeted in other parts of our community.
I just think the way things are being done now, it is haphazard, and we're going to pay the price for that, because yes, we know that there's waste in a lot of things. We know that sometimes programs go too far and they need to be reined in, but you don't just throw out the entire program. What you do, that's what I've learned, is that you analyze that program and you go through it in detail, and then you make some collective decisions in how it should be changed. And that's not what we're seeing. We're just seeing a blanket demolition of the various programs, and the people the people are the ones that are suffering the consequences. And it's going to be even more. You know, when you're talking about federal workers that are losing their job, there was a woman on TV this morning who has worked for the Louisville Metro Housing, I think she said for 25 years, and she got a letter in the mail saying she was terminated. And just this morning, and these are people who normally are hardworking people just trying to do the best that they can, and they're ending up being terminated, and people are suffering as a result of all of this.
I'm puzzled why the city would terminate.
It wasn't. It was through
You said
HUD.
it was a Louisville Metro.
It was Louisville Metro,
Housing.
which is funded. A lot of their programs are HUD funded, and so
Okay.
she received. She's a federal employee, and so she received a termination letter.
As I understand it, being a federal employee is no guarantee of continued lifelong employment. So, I mean, I'm sorry for her. I don't know her particular circumstances. I don't want to develop a policy over one person's experience, though.
These are human lives. They're suffering. Did they do anything to make them deserve to suffer? And who is Elon Musk? I don't think any of us voted for Elon Musk. And
Well, you will note that there's only one person two people in the executive branch that got any votes. There's 2 million civilians that work for the federal government. We did not vote for any of those. And we have not guaranteed them a job.
But this is the guy, this is the face that's going out to everyone and saying, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired. And it's bizarre, John. It's strange.
No, I think it's finally we're getting some control over our government bureaucracy. I think that probably killed our conversation.
And
I don't know, you know, some control, granted. Is everything in the system perfect? Nope, never will be. We need to tinker with it constantly.
Okay.
But
So you would be celebrating some of these cuts?
you know what? Can't be black, can't be white.
Exactly.
There have to be some cuts in the middle that would probably make logical sense. But the wholesale firings, or if you don't send me an email with a job description of what you did in the last week, then you're fired. That's a bit strange.
Yeah, and I'm trying to stretch and see how that applies to our topic here with JCPS, but
I think we've gone past
we've
that.
gone past that.
we've gone a little bit past it. And as we tape on Thursday, Friday is the deadline that schools are supposed to respond back and say what we're doing or not doing. So it sounds like it's in the legal department right now. Basically, does our P equate to an I, and do we need to do anything? So we'll find out soon enough what JCPS decides, and this as we airs on Sunday. So hopefully there'll be some answers soon. We turn now to topic 2. And a challenge close to our hearts here on this panel with our work with the clergy do for the WHS Crusade for Children. And here is Frankie's story.
Rachel Moldovanu's a mother of 3, but Tuesday the conversation centered around just one of her kids, her 15-year-old son with severe autism, whose aggressive behavior over the years has made it unsafe to stay at home.
Our son was getting bigger than us. He was getting stronger than us. And we reached a point where the safety of our family, and especially my 2 daughters, was in jeopardy.
Frankie needed specialized care beyond what Rachel and her husband could give, and they quickly found out the state does not have a residential facility for kids like Frankie unless they're in state custody.
I really had no guidance about where to go. I was advised that it would be best to put my child in state custody.
The Secretary of the Kentucky Cabinet for Health and Family Services responding.
When I heard that somebody had suggested to you that you terminate parental rights?
Yes.
I hate that. That should never be the option. Never.
Rachel hired an attorney and fought for another solution, an exemption that would allow Kentucky Medicaid to pay for her son's care across state lines, a place in Kansas.
The physical pain of being separated from your child, especially a child who is nonverbal, who cannot tell you if they're sad. They cannot pick up the phone and call you and say, Mom, I'm homesick. We are failing families in Kentucky because the best option for my child was 700 miles away. And that should not be the case.
And Frankie isn't alone. There are dozens of Kentucky kids living out of the state for the same reasons.
When my son was born in 2009, the rate of autism was 1 in 110. Today it's 1 in 36. And so I'm asking all of you, this needs to be a priority.
Senators promising to be a part of the fix.
I had no idea that this was the state, the current state of our kids with autism in Kentucky.
There are holes in our services. Those are areas that we have to improve in. That we just have to, and it's not just in your case, but it's in all cases.
So as part of the crusade, we're going through the grant hearing process now, and you all are involved with that. And Father Bill, you certainly talked to your colleagues who are on those panels. And so the stat there of increasing from 1 in 110 to 1 in 36 in just 15 years is staggering to me. And you all hear it in the grant hearings when you hear it. But the question, comment on that please, but the question too about what can we do as a state, what do religious communities do to make this not happen, to have to send her kid to Kansas to get care.
And there's also a factor in this sitting on the panels for crusade grants, because there are human beings in need, but we are mandated only to serve children, and children grow up and children age out. And that's a real stark dilemma for us. And my question is, why is there service in Kansas and not in Kentucky? Looking at demographically, politically, it would seem to me that there would be more similarities than differences in our two states. And why does it exist there but not here? And maybe this is a group of people, not maybe, this is a group of people who need help, and recognizing that they do age out of help portals for children, for minors.
Good points, Stan. I don't know the difference between Kansas and Kentucky. Kansas is flatter, but I don't think that has anything to do with it. Maybe a little more population, so they have more resources to bring. I don't know. It's worth investigating, and it looks like the state legislature is doing that. Good. I raised this issue with when I was on one of the panels. I don't know if I was with you, Jamesetta, but I said over the years we've noticed an increase in autism diagnoses. Is it actually an increase in autism? Probably a lot of it is that. Is it an increase or more willingness to identify somebody on the spectrum, so to speak? Is autism becoming a default diagnosis? And somebody said, well, maybe just a little bit of everything, but maybe we need to find out more as to what's occurring and why, and respond if appropriate, and if we have the resources.
Well, certainly, certain diagnoses have, over time, we've learned different ways of treating.
Yeah.
Depending on what it is. Well, it's pneumonia or COVID, you get a different treatment, but it's similar, type of thing. And so, certainly maybe the increased diagnoses does give us some background for responding appropriately, but again, we do want to respond to this small group. Maybe we need to have a DEA. You know,
diversity, equity, autism.
Yes, exactly. Equity, autism. But I do think it is important for us to recognize that if it is growing, and there are lots of possible reasons for that, if it's part genetics, all that can play into that. But I do know, as was already alluded to, we offer once a month at St. Margaret Mary's what's called a Special Disciples of Jesus Sunday Mass. And it's targeting special needs children, as we started with. But now it's got a good number of special needs adults who come to it as well. And it's a once a month, but it's very flexible. It's a different style and flexibility of worship. And those who come for that half hour for a Sunday service, as opposed to the normal length of service, because it is what we call sensory friendly. It's a sensory friendly service, no loud noises and things like that. One point I mentioned is that that's one thing we've seen. It started out focusing on children with special needs, but we now have a number of people in their 40s, 50s, 60s who have been with their families all these years, but have those needs still. And so to find a way to respond to this group, our state is obligated because they're our citizens.
This is one of those, I think, areas that we're finding that people are living in the shadows with this disease, and I think it was good that it was brought up on a state level so that our legislators can look at it. But I think too, we as part of Crusade, that might be something that we can also begin to have conversation about, not just today, but as we meet, because we are seeing the numbers. We're seeing them in the grant applications and asking those questions. Why are the numbers going up? Why do you need more money? And so we're hearing it directly from the practitioners or the grant writers that numbers are increasing. So perhaps we can also lend our voices to Frankfurt in helping them to understand the need for this type of support.
They are our citizens.
Yes.
You know, we're not talking about them. We're talking about us, fellow citizens.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
So Frankfurt should be very focused on caring for our fellow citizens with their needs.
And this panel sees it. They do grant hearings from February through March, and we hear the stories. And many of the agencies and schools are dealing with this very topic. So, thank you.
I'm gratified. Just watching the clip, it seemed like the legislators at the hearing were very open. To the situation this family was experiencing.
Yeah. And Brooke did a great job with this. This is part 3 of her series of stories on this. So you can go to WHSM.com and see the other 2. It's a remarkable story. So thanks for this discussion today. Thanks to our panel, Dr. Jamesetta Ferguson of St. Peter's United Church of Christ, Father Bill Hammer, St. Margaret Mary and St. William Catholic Churches, Rabbi Stan Miles, Louisville Melton School, and Dr. John Slider, retired pastor, Free Methodist Church. Thank you for watching Moral Side of the News this week and listening to it on the iHeart family of stations. Catch us again on YouTube or next week with an all-new episode. Have a great week.